Hi, I'm Sarah Bearup-Neal, Gallery Manager at the Glen Arbor Arts Center. Today I'm in conversation with visual artist Crystal Neubauer, one of several conversations with practicing artists about their encounters with creative block. Crystal is a mixed media visual artist working in Illinois. Crystal's work is full of broken, cast out, and overlooked items of the past. She sees beauty in the mundane, brings new life to forgotten objects, and finds the process of salvaging old materials and creating new art to be therapeutic and healing. Crystal teaches and exhibits throughout the United States. And welcome, Crystal.
Thank you.
Creative block is part and parcel of a creative practice. But during this time of pandemic and other distracting world events, I've had more than one person tell me they don't know if they're coming or going, if they're here or there, and their studio work has been impeded by this. There seems to be an outbreak of stuck. Crystal, you've been a practicing visual artist for decades. No doubt you've come up against creative blocks. So when you're stuck, what does that mean?
Well, I've discovered for me that being stuck does not mean being without creative ideas. It means that I don't know how to get moving in the studio to access what I know that I know in order to produce those creative ideas. So for me, I can sit down at the studio table and have a plethora of ideas at the ready and then walk into the studio and not know where to start. It feels overwhelming sometimes, and that will cause me to just feel stuck. And in general, the feeling of overwhelm, I think, is one that artists encounter in the studio. I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do first. Translates in our minds to I just don't know what to do. I'm stuck.
In August, you sent out one of your monthly email newsletters, and in it you talked about self-doubt, the fear of committing to a composition as it's laid out, risk-taking, and these are all characteristics of creative block. Can you talk a little bit about that? And you've also talked before about intuitive voice and critical voice in the context of creative block.
So for me, I did not get to go to a formal, art school for a college education. I did not have an art degree, did not get to follow that path. So I came about becoming an artist more organically. And everything that I do, I had to kind of figure out and teach myself to do in the studio. And what that would look like in the art of collage would be that I would sit down at the table and I would have these compositions pieced together in front of me. And then I would get tripped up with self-doubt and conflict inside that once I had put glue on the back of these elements and stuck them down to the substrate that I'm gluing on, all of these questions would rise up. What if I didn't like it? What if I wrecked it? What if I used up this material? And I had to develop ways to address all of those things in order to produce the work. And that's how I developed, several exercises off that. And I just kind of basically learned to coach myself in the process.
You've written about a 5-minute exercise you use. It strikes me as completely applicable to our conversation today. So can you describe this exercise that you've created?
So the 5-minute collage exercise came from that period of time that I was just learning how to approach the art of collage, and was getting really excited about what I was producing. But I would often come into the studio and be at that point where I would get bound up in fear of moving forward. And a lot of those places where I feel like we do get stuck in the studio our underlying fears that we're not cognitively aware of in this space of our studio time. And what I started to understand was that was my block. You know, there was a bunch of messages coming at me. So you were talking about what the differences between the art critic and the intuitive voice was during that time that I really started to learn to tune in and hear what those things were that were being said inside my head, what my thoughts were. And I call them voices, you know, and they're just our thoughts, and they come up in a way that is both encouraging to us to create and discouraging to us. And I would encounter these discouraging messages that I've learned to label my art critics. And they would say things like, if you put glue on that and it doesn't turn out the way that you want it to, you won't have that nice element again. It'll be ruined. You'll have wasted it. You'll have wasted your time. All of these messages then became binding. And so I finally one day put a timer on the clock and decided to challenge myself. During this time, I was kind of organically learning, watching what other people were doing, exploring different adhesives. And I thought, you know, I had all of the boxes checked except just getting it finished. And so putting 5 minutes on the clock and challenging myself to just glue it, not think about it. It was around the time that Nike's slogan, "Just Do It," was so popular. There was an ad campaign out. I would hear it on the radio, on the TV or whatever. And so I started saying that to myself, but using the word glue, just glue it. Come on, Crystal, just glue it. And in saying that helped. But when I started doing the 5-minute exercises, when I started timing myself and giving myself a small window of time, because what I recognized was when I had vast windows of time, I got very little done. I got very tripped up in my head over all those voices, all those messages that I was hearing. And putting the 5 minutes on the clock forced me into a different mind frame. It forced me to focus on what I could do, not what I couldn't do. And that has actually become a mantra of mine over the years as I've developed my art practice, is looking at what I can do, looking at what materials I do have available. And so that's what the 5-minute collage exercise was designed for, was to help me shift from focusing on that art critic voice, that voice that stops me from creating, to listening to the voice that encourages me to try something and glue and not think about it. And it wasn't a matter of not thinking about what my compositions looked like. It was just a matter of thinking about getting it done and not overthinking it. So I would make a decision, and that's how I approach the 5-minute collages to this day, is I look at the pile of material I've brought to the table. I decide with my first gut instinct which piece I would like to apply first. This pile is random. I pick the piles that I bring to the table with, there's the rule that I made for myself for that is not to overthink when I'm picking. I'm not allowed to decide what matches what. I just choose the material based on that gut instinct. I like this, I like that. That's not so great today. And I'll bring a pile to the table. And then when the 5-minute timer goes on, when the time starts, I do the same process. I choose based on what my eye finds the most appealing in the moment. I don't question it, second guess it, pick it up, put glue on the back, place it in the first place that my gut says, maybe here. I trust that feeling and I move to the next piece, so that I'm forcing myself to get out of that, not where I'm not thinking about it. It's not like an auto draw exercise. It's more like not overthinking and second guessing the decision I just made, and allowing myself the freedom to move on. And knowing also that then after that timer is up and I'm looking at what I created, there's no expectation that this is going to be anything. It's just an exercise that gets me moving. And yet I've produced so many over the years that I can pretty readily do one that pleases me now in that 5-minute period of time. And if not, I've learned that there's always another layer that I can add to complete it. The timer going off doesn't mean the creativity turns off.
I think that's one of the beauties of collage. At least I found that in my own practice. If you encounter a hurdle or you make a mistake, you can always glue something new on top of it. But as you're describing, it requires that one doesn't regard their materials as so precious.
Yes.
That you get paralyzed and you
Yes.
can't even use your materials that you have.
And what you just touched on is what I call our rule keeper in the studio. And that's part of that art critic packaging where we have certain rules. And for me, some of those rules were and still are about the value of the material, whether it is sentimental value or actual retail value of the materials that I've purchased. It will trip me up every time. And so I have developed a lot of kind of catchphrases and slogans over the years as I've taught myself. And then I've also taught the participants who come to my workshops. And one of those is that you are the special occasion, because we have these things that we save for ourselves. Like we bring them home, these beautiful items that we want to use, especially in collage. I'll go out and I'll gather at flea markets and estate sales and places where you might find other people's cast off.
Mm-hmm.
And I will just buy what I find that pleases me. I won't really get caught up in deciding, how am I going to use this? If the price is right, I bring it home. And yet there are times when I bring things home that I find so beautiful, even if it costs $1, that I get fearful of using it because it's so precious, as you've said. And then I've equated that to putting your fine china, your wedding china, in the closet and never having an occasion that's special enough to take it out and use it. And eventually, you know, those closets are cleared out by the children before an estate sale, and everybody argues over who's going to take mom's china. They don't want it. They have their own taste, and it never gets used. And so the slogan is, you are the special occasion. It's here for your use at this time, in this moment, because, you know, we're talking about paper, not fine china. There's so much of it in the world. Our landfills are full of it. If I ruin a piece, if I decide I really didn't like it after all, after I commit the glue, it's the experience that mattered. And I'll find another piece that I'm equally thrilled about the next time I go out and hunt.
I think you touch on something that's really a liberating thought about process being of more import sometimes than the product. I think creative block sometimes is helped along by the pressures we put on ourselves to create a finished product.
Yes, yes. And that has not changed over the years. It actually has increased for me as I moved from just being an experimental artist, just dabbling, just doing this as a side thing, to now becoming a full-time career artist who depends on an income generated from my work.
Mm-hmm.
The pressure just increases to create something sell-worthy every time I come into the studio. And that can become the block then. I mean, we have all kinds of them. We don't even consciously think about them. We just come in and we get locked up because, you know, for me, that manifests in a, like, what if I ruin this? And then I've wasted all my time. And we have to shift the way that we think. And from that critic voice is like the voice of your mother or your worst, you know, art teacher in 3rd grade, or somebody who has said something to you at some point in your life that got in there in your subconscious thinking and became you know, you conformed and changed your behavior over time based on that criticism, whether it was really overt in your life or not so much, just subtle little messages that you pick up in, you know, in school and society here and there. They become our rule keepers. They become the things that we believe. about ourselves when we come to the studio, or about what we have to do, what we should and shouldn't do. And so a lot of times that is actually the block, not our abilities, not our materials that are available to us, not the time, frame. There's so many ways that we can describe artist block. And when you get underneath it all and start to examine it on an emotional level, there's usually some kind of false messaging in that. And so that's kind of what I teach and focus on. Even with the 5-minute collage exercises that I teach today, I startle students a lot of times when I go deeper than they expect to in an art class, because I challenge people to think about what they're thinking about and how that helps or hinders their creative process.
There's a lot of internal dialoguing going on in your head, back and forth conversation. And that's certainly something that you don't hear about in art school, at least when I was in art school. The other thing that I've been thinking about in context of creative block is wondering if it serves a purpose. So in your experience, how do you come out on that question?
That's an interesting question. And as I was thinking about this the other day, I realized that there's always a purpose for me. There's always a meaning for me. And in those places where I just am not producing, I'm just not getting in and doing what I would like to do, or when I'm in the studio, I feel like I'm spinning my wheels. I've looked at it as the term that I like to use is the fallow ground, when the land has to lie fallow and regain the minerals that's been depleted after a crop has been harvested. And that is, there are seasons for artists when that is the case. Maybe you just produced a really important show and finally got it hung, and the days leading up to that show, you're well rested, you've had all the work's at the gallery now, it's done, and you can shift to the next idea that you thought about while you were working on that body of work. But suddenly nothing that you do is working. And to me, those are seasons of fallow ground, where you really need to give yourself permission to do something to refill. And Julia Cameron has her book The Artist's Way, and we learn about taking artist dates. I think take a nap, take a walk, go out in nature, go shopping, buy yourself something cute, for heaven's sakes. Do what fills you up. And that is important for our creative process just as much as getting our butts in the chair and doing the work every day.
Being engaged in the world is very much a part of a creative practice.
It really is. It really is. We can really become isolated in our own studios. Artists, I joke that we must all kind of be inclined towards being introverts, because we have to like to work alone quite a bit. And sometimes for me, I really have to be intentional about getting around people or doing things like Saturday night, going to an art opening, even if I know I'm only going to be there for 30 minutes. Say hi to the artist, look at the art, greet some people, and leave. If I'm not in a very sociable mood, it's still filling. It still fills me up.
I love your analogy about a season for laying fallow.
It's I'm learning a lot about myself in this year. And one of the things that I have learned is there's a reason why I see everything in metaphor. And that I then am able to translate. So my brain is wired a little differently. And I've just learned that I'm kind of on the spectrum. I have a disorder called dyspraxia, and it explains so much about my life. But what it is explained, there was a grieving process and learning that at 54, 55 years old, I'm just finding this out about myself, and how many things would have been easier if I had known. But one of the silver linings in it is that I do see things. I see meaning and patterns in everything. But when I convey that meaning and pattern to the participants in my workshop, light bulbs go off. I mean, you don't have to have a differently wired brain to be able to connect, and suddenly you can see what you couldn't see before. So I find it is kind of a gift to be able to see life that way.
That's marvelous. That's just incredible. Again, that interior dialogue you're having with yourself, working through that, and how lovely you can pass that along to your students. We've talked a lot about your work, and so give us the website address where people can go to not only read more about you, but see your work.
Well, I'm currently going by my name, Crystal Marie. My website is still my former married name, Crystal Neubauer, and it will remain so for some time. So it's Crystal Neubauer is NEUBAUER.com. And there you'll find my work and a lot of, the classes, my teaching schedule and things like that.
We'll have a link to that on the website. Thank you, Crystal, so much for sharing your experience with us. And thanks to everyone who listened in. So until next time, see you later. Bye-bye.